Alright, let's round out this trilogy of reviews with a review of the third movie in the How to Train Your Dragon trilogy. How to Train Your Dragon, The Hidden World, which I got to see a couple weeks early at an early showing just yesterday. Knowing how much I loved the previous two movies, I'm sure you guys can guess that I was super psyched going into this showing. The entire theater was packed entirely full, and I actually read that they sold out hundreds of these early showings across the country. So obviously I was not the only person excited to see this movie. I actually kind of feel lucky at this point that I managed to get my tickets for this early showing when I did. Obviously, since this is a new movie that's not even technically out yet in the country in which I'm making this review, I am going to go spoiler free for this review, though I do plan to talk about spoiler stuff later on once the movie has already been out in theaters properly for about a week or so-ish. So I will have more thoughts about this movie that will go unexplored by the time this review is over, but I do intend to talk about those later, so please don't ask about spoilery stuff in the comments. I don't want to spoil this movie for anybody. To go over the plot vaguely enough that I don't think it'll spoil anything, because I'm assuming everybody's seen the trailers, right? This movie takes place about a year after Dragons 2. Hiccup is now the chief of Berk, and his people do trust him, not unquestioningly so, but they do trust him as their leader, and it was really neat to see. Meanwhile, a new enemy has surfaced, a guy named Grimoire something, who has been asked by some warlord characters who were friends with Drago from the second movie to stop Hiccup and his friends from thwarting their dragon trapping efforts. And this guy has the skills and the experience to do that, despite the fact that Hiccup has been bringing more and more dragons back to Berk, and so their dragon flock is bigger than ever. He even has a really cool way of keeping his dragons, because he does, of course, have dragons, from being affected by the commands of an alpha like Toothless. Thankfully, though, Hiccup is able to get wind that this guy is coming before he first shows up, and he has learned from the past events in this movie series, so he knows now not to just run after an enemy without a plan, and not to not worry about people who are this dangerous, and so he meets this threat head on. He comes at it with all of his skill and all of his intelligence, but this guy still gives him a run for his money, which obviously is a problem. Meanwhile, a female dragon, which isn't a Night Fury but is a very similar type of dragon, has started showing up, and for the first time ever, it looks like Toothless might have a life aside from the life he has with Hiccup that he might want to pursue. He might want to pursue a relationship with this dragon, and in fact, throughout the movie he does. Those two characters, Hiccup and Toothless, have always kind of developed in parallel to one another anyway, so it is about time that Toothless got his own romantic subplot. And quite honestly, it's one of the best things about this movie, and I would say the entire trilogy overall, the relationship between these two characters who are so well characterized. Toothless and this other dragon are so well characterized, despite the fact that everything that we learn about them, we have to learn either through exposition from another character or through their body language and facial features. That their relationship really comes alive. You believe it. These aren't just two pet characters in the background that everyone says have a crush on one another. These are real characters who are falling in love in front of our eyes. And it is because of this relationship that Toothless actually develops as a character so much that there's a point in this movie where he actually comes to conflict with Hiccup. Like, not so much that they fight or anything, but they are definitely not on the same page anymore, at least for a little while. And that's such an odd thing to see, but it makes perfect sense within the context of the narrative. And so honestly, I was kind of glad to see it. These two may have had a parallel development. They may function very well as a single unit when they have to, but they're not one person. They're two different people. And it was good to see the narrative treat them as such. But it's not as if Hiccup didn't get any development in this movie too. I hypothesized in my review of How to Train Your Dragon 2 that all three of these movies were going to end up being 3 parts of the same coming-of-age story of both Hiccup and Toothless, and I was right. Once again, the previous movie doesn't feel like it necessarily needs a follow-up in order to be complete, and yet this movie comes along and somehow still completes it. Hiccup ends up having to make a choice at the end of this movie, a choice which is difficult for him to make because he is just as stubborn as his father was, and he is just as comfortable in his life now as his father was in his old life. But by taking all of the lessons that he has learned to heart, and also learning from his father's example, Hiccup is able to make the right choice in the end. And it's kind of a heartbreaking choice, but I understand why he made it, and at the end of the day, it made for, I think, the best possible ending that this trilogy could have gotten. Once again, the world building in this movie was fantastic. We got all kinds of stuff, once again, that was just kind of there in the background that the characters were just doing to show us them doing it, which expanded this world and its technology and its lore all over the place. The visuals were fantastic. I didn't really notice like a noticeable upgrade going from the second movie to the third one the way I noticed an upgrade going from the first to the second, but the visuals were still stunning, of course. It's not as if they've gotten worse since movie 2. And all of those comedic elements that I said in my review of the second movie, at the very least, amused me enough that I was kind of chuckling. Well, they all got a lot better in this movie, too. The comedy in this movie didn't just land with a chuckle. I was laughing out loud through the entire thing, wherever I was supposed to be. Whenever a joke was being told, I found it genuinely funny. And all of the other Dragon Rider characters who, in the previous movie, felt like they belonged and therefore didn't feel like they could be lifted out of the plot, here, they were necessary to make this movie as good as it was. They also got a bit of an upgrade. The girl twin, I can never remember which one's which, Rough Nut or Tough Nut, I don't remember. She, in particular, was a delight in this movie. I had a lot of fun watching her just be her crazy self. Really, the only thing about this movie that I don't feel keeps it on par with the previous one is that I didn't feel like the soundtrack was as standout this time as it was last time. It was more on par, I think, with the soundtrack for How to Train Your Dragon 1, which I feel was just a little bit below How to Train Your Dragon 2. That said, I'm sitting here just like I was when I was putting together my notes for my How to Train Your Dragon 2 review, trying to think of some flaw to talk about in this movie, and there isn't really one. For example, I had somebody say to me after I made that How to Train Your Dragon 2 review that there is a flaw in How to Train Your Dragon 2. It's that Drago isn't a particularly strong villain. He's not all that memorable and isn't that great of a character on his own. I argue that that's not the case because he does facilitate the plot the way that he's supposed to, and that's clearly the only reason he's there. He's not there to be a developed character. But all of that said, the villain in this movie is actually better than Drago. He's a better character than Drago and actually has some character to him. So you could even say that this movie does fix a problem with the previous one, if you agree that Drago is a weak enough villain that it is a problem. It's weird to say, but I feel like this movie deserves the same rating as the last one. I think this is a 10 out of 10 movie. That may make this trilogy one of the highest rating movie franchises that I've ever seen, honestly, which is, it's really freaking cool because I do love these movies a lot. It is kind of a bummer, though, that this ride is over. They have said that there may be spin-offs of these movies set in the same universe, but this story, Hiccup's story, Toothless' story, it's over. It's done. There's never going to be any more, so while this was a fantastic conclusion to that story, it's kind of bittersweet. Though there is still the TV show, which I have not finished watching, and those potential spin-offs for me to look forward to, so I'm far less bummed out about this than I could be. Usually I don't like when things end, but this time I'm actually pretty cool with it. Still, that said, this movie is amazing. It is genuinely amazing. I can't think of a better word to describe it than that. And if you are a fan of just genuinely good movies, or fantasy movies in particular, or even this franchise in particular, you're going to love it. I have no doubt about that whatsoever. Everyone's story just ends so satisfyingly. You get the sense that Toothless really got what he wanted, what he needed. You get to see Hiccup come to a point where he fully believes in his own abilities, probably for the first time in his life, and seeing everyone around him support him as much as they did, seeing this group of Dragon Riders come together as a closer-knit group than they've probably ever been in one of these movies before, it was all very satisfying. It was a satisfying end to a fantastic story. Like in Hiccup's case in particular, you really get the sense that he could not have made the correct decisions that he made here, the good, correct decisions that he made in this movie, if not for the lessons that he learned in the previous movies. Then you can work out which lessons are informing which decisions. Like, how cool is that? That's just such good storytelling. All of that said, though, as per usual, again, without any spoilers, please, I'd like to know, what did you guys think of How to Train Your Dragon: The Hidden World, if you have seen it? Let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below, or over on my Discord, link in the description. But either way, This has been AJ22, and I will talk to you guys later.